This recording is about basal metabolic rate. We've already talked about metabolic rate. Metabolic rate is the rate at which the body uses energy, and the way that we quantify it is usually in calories per minute. And so far we've talked about metabolic rate during exercise, but also we often measure metabolic rate at rest, and we call that BMR. And it's the absolute minimum amount of energy required just for essential physiological functions. So BMR is measured with indirect calorimetry. Under very strict conditions. So the person has to be at rest. They have to be supine, laying on their back. You want them in a thermoneutral environment, okay, because remember that we only want to be measuring the calories for the essential physiological functions. If you have somebody in a cold room, their metabolic rate will be increased because the body's warming itself. And on the other hand, if you have them in a hot room, the metabolic rate is going to be increased because they are cooling themselves. So you want the BMR to represent the absolute minimum amount of calories for the absolute basic essential functions of breathing, heartbeat, etc. You also want them to have had at least 8 hours of sleep, so you want them to be sleep deprived. And you want them on a 12-hour fast. Okay, and that's because we don't want them digesting any food. We don't want them to have any caffeine in them. All of these things are going to affect BMR. So you could measure somebody's basal metabolic rate with indirect calorimetry, and the most accurate values are going to come under these conditions. So the conditions give you a little bit of information about the types of things that would affect BMR. We'll talk about that in a minute. The average value for BMR is about 1,200 to 1,400 calories per day. Okay, and so what that means is the average person, if the average person laid in bed all day at rest, that's about how many calories they would burn. When we add in normal daily activity, so we take the average value and we add in normal daily activity, the average person burns somewhere between 1,800 and 3,000 calories per day. Okay, so we'll talk about the things that affect BMR, and it'll give you a better idea of why we have such a big range. So the things that affect BMR, fat-free mass. Okay, fat-free mass is everything other than body fat. So, but the large portion of your fat-free mass is made up of muscle mass. Your fat-free mass is very metabolically active, which means it requires a lot of energy to maintain fat-free mass. It's very active tissue. Even when your muscles are at rest, they're very active just to keep them up. So they require a lot of energy compared to fat. Another factor that affects your BMR would be your body's surface area. Okay, so if you have more body surface area, you have a higher BMR, and that's because with greater body surface area, you have more area for heat loss. And therefore, people with more body surface area have to work harder to maintain body temp. Okay, and that's why if you take two individuals who are the same weight, the same fat-free mass, but one is taller than the other, the taller individual has a greater body surface area, so we would expect the taller individual to have a greater BMR. Body temperature is going to affect BMR. Okay, as I told you, you want them in a thermoneutral environment. If an individual has a temperature, a fever, this is going to increase BMR. We also see a change with age. Okay, and what we tend to see is that as you get older, your BMR goes down. Some of that is due to age, but most of that is because as we age, we tend to lose fat-free mass. Partly because we become less active, and partly because of our hormonal changes that make it harder for us to maintain fat-free mass. So as you get older, your BMR will go down. Also, psychological stress. Psychological stress causes SNS responses, which increases your metabolic rate. Other types of things, caffeine will increase your metabolic rate, tobacco will increase your metabolic rate. So there are a lot of different things that increase metabolic rate. That's why when you're measuring somebody's BMR, you want to get a good, accurate measure. You want to make sure they're at rest. You want to make sure they're lying down. You want to make sure they're in a thermoneutral environment, well rested, without any food.